Hello, everybody. Welcome into Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. My name is Brandon Adams, along with Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel, Mike Griffith. It's good to have you here tonight. We'll get a lot into the Georgia quarterback situation, what happens now, and that Jamie Newman's on his way out, getting ready for the NFL draft. Apparently some concerns with the coronavirus, maybe a lot of reasons, but one way or another, Jamie Newman's not the quarterback of the Georgia Bulldogs anymore, not a quarterback on this roster anymore. We'll cover a lot of that on the show. I will say I've decided to sort of step outside from tonight's program. I am typically not a vain person, but last week I was really disappointed with how I looked on the camera for this show. My house is not, I promise, that dark, but somehow it's always really dark when we try to do this show from inside my house. I felt like a corpse last week, so I was glad to be able to step outside and glad to see all of you as well for what I'm guessing is going to be a spirited show, as we got some huge news this week involving Newman. I think for a lot of Georgia fans, it was initially bad news. Maybe they give themselves a chance to feel better about it over the course of the 24 hours, but certainly no shortage of topics to discuss this week, gentlemen.
Yeah, whatever we're going to find a way to talk about, as we're less than a little over 3 weeks away from the start of the season. You know, this news, there's just nothing to talk about right now in this program here, but we're going to find a way to make it work.
And we'll find a way to spin it forward here a bit as well. So for folks who may have been under a rock for the last 24 hours or so, Jamie Newman has opted out for the upcoming season. He releases a statement, cites confusion surrounding the global pandemic. He's also preparing for the upcoming NFL draft. Georgia coach Kirby Smart has wished him well in that endeavor, and that now leads Georgia with 4 scholarship quarterbacks. JT Daniels, the recent transfer from USC, Dwan Mathis, the redshirt freshman, the incoming freshman Carson Beck, and Stetson Bennett, who was the backup last year to Jake Fromm, and who's been kind of a fan favorite himself over the years, dating back to his time as a scout team quarterback at Georgia. Jeff, I guess I'll begin with you on this. So with Newman gone, where do you think Georgia goes from here, and how soon do you sort of expect all this to materialize?
So I guess I'm a little confused. I thought the natural, knee-jerk reaction to this from Joe Dog Nation was, heck yeah, Georgia's now at 86 scholarships, and they're right there closer to the number. I thought that was what was happening, because, I mean, allow me to just, share a contrarian view, a little bit. I don't know if the Georgia people, the fan base, I don't know if they ever really knew what they had in Newman. I don't know. Did he get a spring game? No. Did he get that practice buzz sensation where he was shredding the defense? No. I mean, I think I heard a local author try to compare his tenure as a Bulldog to Glenn Mason a little bit recently as well. But, I mean, Jamie Newman, we hardly knew you because we didn't really know what he had. And really, tea leaves everybody else, we don't even know if he was going to be the full-time starter this year.
Well,
go ahead, Connor.
I'd point out one, I believe when JT Daniels first came on here back in or transferred in back in May, I believe on a similar Cover 4, Jeff was the only one to go out and say that JT Daniels would be the starter. But on top of that, Jeff mentioning how we don't know a whole lot about Newman, that I think is largely the reason he appealed to so many people. The fact that he was a mystery, that he had so much potential, but we hadn't sort of seen him either live up to it or fail to live up to it. I think you were able to sell so many people on that potential, and clearly a lot of people bought it because there was this panic yesterday. Not panic might not be the right word, but there was a lot of distress yesterday when it was announced that he was opting out and going towards the NFL draft, when in reality, we've never seen him throw a pass in a Georgia uniform in Sanford Stadium before.
Well, I'll admit this. I don't even know what he looks like without a helmet on. I mean, here's this guy we've talked about so much. I've seen him wearing a Wake Forest helmet. There's, a couple of pictures now of him wearing a Georgia helmet. The truth is, I don't know what he looks like. I don't know what he sounds like when he talks. It's funny that this guy has been such a big part of my professional life over the last few months, a huge part of the content I produce on a fairly regular, almost daily basis. And the truth is if he walked in front of me right now, I would simply not be able to identify him if he wasn't wearing a football uniform. I don't have any idea what he looks like.
You know what? That's a good point, Brandon. I want anybody to be honest, give us visual proof. If anybody was that bought in on Jamie Newman that they went to Fanatics and they bought themselves a number 9 jersey. I mean, Brandon, if I would have told you if we were betting a stake on it, man, would you have been able to regurgitate that he was going to wear number 9 for Georgia?
I might have on a good day, but maybe not quite every day.
So I want to meet that fan that had already bought a 9 and put Newman on the back before they put the kibosh on that with the licensing stuff. But I mean, that's the big thing. We keep looking at it, and I think Mike, the number is 86 now. It moves Georgia down to 86. But I think the thing for me is when you answer your question earlier about what this means and moves it forward, I think this helps Georgia in a certain way because you get more reps for your number 1 and 2 guys. And if Daniels is the guy, then you get a lot more reps for him and you don't have to figure out anymore who the number 1 is. And I think it also hurts Georgia because it takes away the depth, especially from a running aspect from the quarterback position. The quarterback position at Georgia gets less athletic.
I want to come back to something that Connor Riley said in a moment, but Mike, let me give you a chance to weigh on this first. Where do you think Georgia goes from here after all of this?
I think they go where they were going. I think JT Daniels was splitting the reps with Newman primarily. And, he came to play this year. We had that discussion back when he arrived. He didn't come to sit for a year and rehab, 3,000 miles away from his home. He came to play this year. He'd scouted out Georgia. He liked the system that Todd Monken had. Todd Monken obviously liked him. They obviously felt there was a need. They gave Newman a chance to win the job. And, Jamie weighed the odds and decided that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. I mean, it's not easy to be a college quarterback in a COVID-19 environment when you're not even sure you're going to be the starting quarterback. So I think Jeff said it best. He put a flak jacket on his draft stock.
I think the only problem with that, though, is that this is pretty much the way that Kirby Smart has handled all of his quarterback competitions. And frankly, the recent track record of those quarterback competitions hasn't necessarily produced the best signal caller among them. So to sort of shrug and say, well, this was just Daniels beating out Jamie Newman, I simply don't believe that's true. I believe that Newman was going to start against Arkansas, and I'll continue to say that over and over again. And B, I think one of the things that gives some Georgia fans some pause is that, as I said before, this is a Georgia quarterback situation that for the most part, it's been pretty chaotic over the last couple of seasons. Jake Fromm left after last year, even though it was only a 5th round pick. Justin Fields leaves after the 2018 season, even though in retrospect, it's obvious he was the better quarterback than Jake Fromm. Even in 2017, when Jacob Eason was pegged to be the starter instead of Jake Fromm, it's pretty obvious in 2017 that Fromm was the better of those 2 quarterbacks. Yet at the beginning of the season, it seems like Georgia's had a hard time necessarily identifying who their best quarterback truly is. So I don't know how many Georgia fans necessarily have all that much faith in the competition that Kirby Smart wages at quarterbacks, just given the erratic nature of the quarterbacks that competition has produced.
Well, I think there's a difference, Brandon, between the most talented quarterback and the best quarterback. I mean, you can't tell me that a true freshman who's never played in a pro-style offense is going to be better than a guy that has an entire year under his belt and came within a 2nd and 26 of quarterback in a national championship team. Now, the Justin Fields that we saw last year in the Ohio State system certainly looked good, but the Jake Fromm that I saw ranked 5th in the nation in pass efficiency the year that Justin Fields was trying to beat him out. Now the following year, I can't tell you who would have been better if Justin would have stuck around in year 2. I don't think there's much question within the clubhouse who the better quarterback was in 2018, the true freshman who'd never played college football or the guy who'd played 14 games and won a Rose Bowl and an SEC title. But talent and best are 2 different things. And I think with Jamie Newman, you're looking at that again. I also think that had there been a spring football season, Jamie Newman would have had time to get acclimated to a brand new system. And we might not be having this discussion. For that matter, JT Daniels might not be sitting here at Georgia, but as it was, Georgia decided they needed a quarterback, and JT Daniels felt he could be that guy.
I mean, Connor, to go back to something you said a moment ago about, you said for some Georgia fans, there was a sense of panic. I don't know that I would use the word panic, but if you did use that word, something to the tune of being a little bit worried, that's why I think some Georgia fans may have been a little bit worried about the news they got yesterday, not because they knew Newman was going to be great. Frankly, we don't know if any of these guys can truly play at the SEC level. There's mixed results for kind of, every single person that's in the mix here for all of this, but it's another example of just what is kind of a weird situation for Georgia over the course of the last couple of years. It's an unorthodox story on the heels of what have been a couple of years worth of unorthodox stories for Georgia, the quarterback spot.
Right. And I would say definitely the last 2 years, it seems like the offense has been sort of the missing reason, or the reason Georgia hasn't gotten back to the college football playoff and won a national title there. I know the Alabama game, I don't want to relitigate that right now, but the questions keep coming up with Kirby Smart in this offense, and why can't he seem to figure it out, or why can't they do what Clemson does, where they have a dominant defense and a great offense? Why can't they sort of figure out a way to sort of replicate what Ohio State is able to do, where they have a dynamic offense and a dynamic defense? And until we see that on the field, we're going to keep having these questions and these wonderments of, well, a quarterback just left. Did Georgia just see its best quarterback walk out the door like it did ultimately, I think, with Justin Fields when he left in 2018?
Jeff, let me read you this comment from Keith Folds on Facebook. He says, BA, you may continue to say Newman was going to start, but I think Newman got cold feet because he was being pushed so hard. Here's my question for you. Do you think that Newman did enough homework on how he would be handled at Georgia? Because what Kirby Smart's doing now is exactly what we would have expected Kirby Smart to do. The one thing that no one ever really says in this discussion, for whatever reason, is a lot of the times when coaches behave this way, it's because they don't want other quarterbacks to transfer out of the program. That's why they don't name starters. That's why they say it's neck and neck. Sam Pittman's doing the same thing at Arkansas, even though everyone knows that Felipe Franks is going to be his starting quarterback. This is the way that Kirby Smart would treat any quarterback situation, no matter how it was actually playing out. You think Newman did enough homework to be aware of that? Because this was something he should have been aware of before he came here.
Well, Brennan, you said something there. I'll put that in neutral and kind of park that off to the side. But the first thing I want to just answer your question, and I guess to me, this feels sort of like a mail order bride in terms of a relationship or trying to make this marriage work. And here's what I mean by that. You bring in a graduate transfer in Jamie Newman, who's 23 years old. Remember, he came in with Jacob Eason's class in 2016. College graduate, started, I think, 20 games of college football. And here's how you make this marriage work is you act like a graduate transfer, PhD, or at least you have your degree in college football in the meeting room and in the film room and on the field. And by the way, there's this little thing called COVID that makes the degree of difficulty here harder. And there's also a new offensive philosophy being implemented across the program as well. I believe this, and I will believe this until Brennan is on his 75,000th Dog Nation Daily Show, is if Jamie Newman was walking on water January, February, March, and acting like a graduate transfer and acting like it was a very happy marriage, a Joe Burrow type season, Georgia doesn't go out and get JT Daniels. That's what I feel. I don't see that happening for whatever reason. Monken, Smart, I wonder if they looked at things and they go, championship defense. Let's make sure we have a championship caliber quarterback under center. And I think that's the thing with Newman, that I don't want to say he allowed the opening, but I know Kirby wants depth, and I know the staff wants to assemble as many guys as possible. But as you said, Brandon, I think we're still waiting on our very first fulfilling in swan song to a Georgia quarterback under Kirby Smart. There hasn't been a happy ending, even with Jake Fromm's happy ending. And I think that's something with the quarterback's position that continues with Jamie Newman.
Connor, jump in on this.
So I thought of this morning, and I believe Mike touched a little bit on it in terms of remembering the timeline with all this, and that Jamie Newman got to Georgia before they had officially hired Todd Monken. Now, maybe they were in discussions about it, and they mentioned that too in the pitch. But from an official standpoint, Newman, the quarterback, got here before the new offensive play caller and designer was in there. And it made me think back to the 2015 Georgia quarterback battle, where for the longest period of time, we all thought that Bryce Ramsey was going to be the guy at Georgia. Mike Bobo ultimately goes on to leave, and they bring in Brian Schottenheimer. But at that point in time, we're also thinking, Ramsey will still be the guy through spring practice, through the summer. Then in the middle of summer, Grayson Lambert shows up as a graduate transfer from Virginia, notably after Brian Schottenheimer had been hired as the offensive coordinator. I still think at that point in time, a lot of people still felt that, it'll still be Ramsey's guy. This guy's just a capable backup with playing time to have in case of injury. Lambert ultimately goes on to win the job because Schottenheimer the offensive coordinator happened to like him and what he could do in his offense a lot more than what the guy that had already been there and predisposed to in Ramsey was able to do. And I do think there's potentially some similarities here with what Daniels is able to do, both athletically and physically, and how that is matched up and meshed in his pass offenses compared to what Newman has been able to do.
And my guy, what I'll say is if you go back and listen to what Kirby Smart said in 2018, you were covering this team in 2018 about the presence of Fromm and Fields in the same roster. Kirby famously said the plan is there is no plan. Knowing that was true in 2018, the idea that JT Daniels arrives at Georgia as a part of some sort of 4D chess maneuver master plan because they had made a mistake going out and getting Jamie Newman, I have a hard time believing that this is a part of a master plan now, when the situation in 2018, by Smart's own admission, was just an attempt to grab as much talent as you possibly could. When I see Daniels' arrival here, and I celebrated that as a good thing. It's never a bad thing to have good quarterbacks. It was a good thing that Georgia brought in JT Daniels. But the idea that it was a part of some sort of master plan correcting an error that they had made by bringing in Jamie Newman, that's simply not been Smart's track record. He has acquired talent and then figured it out once these guys have gotten on the roster. It's a lot easier for me to believe that was true when it comes to the acquisition of Daniels, more so than anything else, because that's what Kirby Smart's track record has been. For the most part, it's worked. In the situation involving quarterbacks, I think it sowed a little bit of chaos.
Yeah, I think it was an insurance policy. I thought it was odd, BA, when Kirby said during the virtual G-Day game that they still didn't know what they had at quarterback. Now, Jamie Newman had been around for 4 months at that point, and the head coach is saying we still don't know what we have at quarterback. And then you investigate and dig a little deeper and you find out that, there was some mutual interest between JT Daniels and Georgia in the month of May. And that tells you for sure now that Georgia doesn't know what they have at quarterback. Maybe Jamie Newman isn't going to fit into Todd Monken's offense. And therefore you say, you know what, we've got this chance. This 5-star guy really likes Todd Monken's system. Let's bring him in. Let's let him and Newman compete. Now, to your point, that's not what Newman signed up for. But to Jeff's point, maybe had Newman made the coaches feel comfortable, they say, let's not bring in JT Daniels because we feel good about our quarterback room and we don't want to upset the apple cart. So I think you've got to give, in my mind at least, I give the coaches the benefit of the doubt. I thought that Jake Fromm was the right call in 2017. Once Jacob Eason went down, he held the job. I thought in 2018, it was interesting to me that Kirby Smart never announced a starter between Justin and Jake. There wasn't even a depth chart. And it stayed that way all season. And I think maybe Jamie Newman figured out, I'm never really going to be the guy. Every week, I am going to have to battle and look over my shoulder or look across the quarterback meeting room at a guy that may start if I have a bad day. Georgia is not for everyone, and Kirby is not going to leave much to chance.
Okay, let me finish up this part of the conversation. I want to talk more about Newman in a moment, but Jeff said something similar a moment ago. You referenced the Kirby Smart on virtual G-Day saying we still don't know what we have in Jamie Newman. I'm not asking a sarcastic question. I'm asking a legitimate question. How would they know what they had in Newman? There had been no practices. There was not going to be any kind of G-Day game. Newman had just arrived on campus. I know you wrote about this. You seem to take that as some sort of damning quote, but to me, it's just an honest remark for a guy that you've brought on campus. Kirby Smart has a tendency to downplay everyone on the Georgia roster. That just seems like an easy thing to say for a guy that they truly had not seen practice yet. This goes back to what also Jeff said a moment ago too. So Jeff, you can weigh in on this about what happened in January, February, and March. I mean, in March, we were all locked in our houses. I'm just not really quite sure what Jamie Newman could have proved in the middle of a coronavirus lockdown.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, now they had been able to supervise with new NCAA rules some throwing, but they hadn't played football or put on the pads. I did think it was interesting that at the start of July, after the voluntary workouts, Kirby said, hey, this guy's got leadership ability, and he sounded more bullish on Jamie Newman. Okay, so whatever had gone wrong or whatever disconnect had occurred that triggered the JT Daniels acquisition, maybe put to rest. Now Jamie Newman starts to feel good about himself. He did do one interview, albeit a private interview for boosters that I watched, and felt good about himself, compared himself to Steve McNair and Donovan McNabb and Cam Newton. This was a confident guy rolling into camp, and Kirby Smart said he's got some leadership abilities. I like that, essentially. But then, the pedal hits the mat, they start scrimmaging, and suddenly COVID becomes an issue for Jamie. Now, I think it was more than COVID. I do think COVID plays a role in it because, again, I think that, going through the mental gymnastics of dealing with COVID-19, guys, we know how it stressed us out. Imagine having to go in a football building every day and follow those strict protocols. So now the juice isn't worth the squeeze. You're not even sure you're going to hold the starting job. And if you lose the starting job, what happens to your draft stock? So That's why it was a safe business decision for Jamie.
Connor, before you weigh in, Jeff, jump on this too, because you also mentioned that before about January, February, March. And, I just find myself a little skeptical of that. So give me your thoughts on what it was that you think maybe Newman didn't do during that time.
Well, Brandon, we hear now, and I think the staff has already admitted it, about how the mental reps you can get through Zoom and install and walkthrough. There's the time here where a coordinator or somehow during this period, they can get together and they can start talking about the offense. They can start repping it. They can start looking at it, not with the ball, not on the field, but just getting it up on the board. And I guess I want to try and just hit this one squarely on the head, if you don't mind. Here's what I believe. And I believe let's play this fun little mini game. I always like to have fun with you fellas. I want you to call it out. Call it out. Dog poop or dog food right now. If you don't believe it's one or the other, let's roll with it. Here's what I think. Newman, and this is kind of collecting a lot of data here. The scrimmage last week, I have to feel that that's a catalyst for this decision, along with Newman, some of his contemporaries like Jamar Chase and his teammate at Wake Forest also opting out. It's a national dialogue about opting out. But here's what I think. All of a sudden, you got JT Daniels getting reps in the first scrimmage, and you see him getting reps with number 1 and number 2. Now, according to reports, JT Daniels handled himself well. Now, he held the ball too long. I think he took some sacks, but I think he moved the ball, moved the chains, and completed a lot of checkdowns. But you see the gap, or at least everybody can look at the gap closing a little bit. Coming out of that scrimmage, pay attention, because beat writers like Mike Griffith always say one thing they love about Kirby Smart is he tells it like it is. Now, he may layer it, and he may camouflage it into corners or something like that, like a Where's Waldo puzzle. But when he said, no one's separating themselves yet, to me, that was a aha moment where Newman's probably thinking, been here since January, did the booster call, trying to assimilate myself. I got some qualities. I've played some games. I've got the deep ball. And all of a sudden, I'm not separating myself. And then Daniels is getting more reps and looking pretty good doing it. Man, I think that had to play a factor here along with everything else. Gentlemen, play dog food or dog food?
I'll call dog food on one specific thing Jeff pointed out there. Jamie Newman could have thrown for 600 yards, 8 touchdowns, and completed every single one of his passes. And Kirby Smart isn't coming out and praising him and saying he's doing a great job. He's our starter. This is the guy for us. He's not doing that. Now, maybe behind closed doors he is. And maybe to your point, that does play a factor. I'm certainly not willing to discredit that. But the idea that Kirby Smart coming out and saying that no one is separating themselves in a press conference, I just don't buy that into factoring into his decision all that much.
Yeah, I think Connor's 100% right about that. That certainly lines up with my opinion on this. Let me push pause for right now. We'll get more of this. It's Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. I'm Brandon Adams. That was Connor Riley. We've got Mike Griffith here, Jeff Sintel there as well. It's all brought to you by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. They live and work in communities just like yours all across the state of Georgia, providing great cultural programs, but also saving you money on your auto, your home, your life insurance. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau is famous for doing. They are always the home team. You can find them online. They will take good care of you. GFBinsurance.com. That's GFBinsurance.com. That'll get you in touch with the Georgia Farm Bureau. Find out the ways in which they can save you big money on your insurance, and also just find out the ways in which they're a good neighbor for us here in the state of Georgia. Always the home team. That's our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. So let me move on and talk a little bit more about Jamie Newman from the standpoint of, if he was here right now and he were to say why it was that he left, from his perspective, what do you think that story is? Mike, you mentioned the coronavirus part of this a moment ago. What do you think Jamie Newman's side of this story is?
A business decision. It's a business decision. He came to Georgia to help prepare him and improve his NFL draft stock, and it reached a point of diminishing returns. Like I said, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. The things weren't matriculating as he thought that they would. Maybe he didn't feel as comfortable in the offense. The playing time situation, obviously, there was a quarterback competition that was continuing to go on. And SEC football moves fast, BA. We say it all the time, just how good SEC football is, and when Jamie Newman said he wanted to come and compete against the best defense in the country, my reaction was, be careful what you wish for, because you might not have much success. And when they're stacking the box with 8 different guys and they're bringing different combination blitzes, and you're making reads that aren't on the same page with what the coordinator coached you up to do, there's going to be friction. And if you don't get it by now, then, you may not get it in the next 3 weeks. I mean, Jamie been here 7 months. I mean, to me, it was a red flag. And let's take it off Kirby for a minute. B, I think you said more than anybody, you wanted Kirby to turn this offense over to the offensive coordinator. This is Todd Monken. I don't think Kirby Smart's the one sitting here saying who the quarterback. I think this is Todd Monken's decision. And, so now you want to turn it over to an NFL coordinator. And I think Todd was very level when he talked about the quarterback priorities, kind of wrote a really good story on that. Number 1, he said, was accuracy. Number 2 was mental toughness. Number 3 was athleticism. So I think if I dial it all the way back to the start of the show, and something that Jeff said, and something that you said, that nobody really knew what and who Jamie Newman was. So I think maybe people kind of assigned the identity that we wanted them to have. We all saw some people, he was going to be the Justin Fields that Georgia never got to. For others, he was going to be Cam Newton. For others, he was Dak Prescott. For others, he was what Jake Fromm could have done his senior year if he finished. Everybody had a preconceived notion about what Jamie Newman was going to do. And that was probably not fair to Jamie Newman.
So I just want to make sure we're very clear about this. Are you saying that Newman's not here because he couldn't get the Georgia offense? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that he wasn't a good fit for the Georgia offense. I mean, the air raid offense requires a lot of intermediate throws. Jamie has a strong arm. Jamie is a very athletic guy. He was very effective with the RPO system. Let's give Dave Clawson some credit. Wake Forest had better offensive numbers against North Carolina than Clemson did. So let's give Wake some credit. And maybe Dave Clawson found an offense that took advantage of Jamie's skills better than anyone else thought that he could have. He had him for 3 years there, right? So maybe he designed an offense around Jamie's strengths. Now, what I wonder is, did Todd Monken come in and instead of designing an offense around Jamie's strengths, he said, okay, coach, you hired me to run the air raid. Here it is. And to Connor's point, Jamie Newman was essentially on board before Todd Monken was hired when you think about it. So was he really Todd Monken's pick to run this particular offense? So there are a lot of questions there, a lot of fill in the blanks. Just because a quarterback doesn't fit in an offense doesn't mean he didn't get it. I look at Steve Young with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was an also-ran. He goes off to the West Coast offense in the 49ers, and he becomes an NFL Hall of Famer. So fit has a lot to do with it for these quarterbacks.
Jeff, go ahead, Connor.
I was just going to certainly say, I think there's a very real chance here that Todd Monken maybe does like JT Daniels and his potential skill set a little bit more than what Jamie Newman has. And one of the things that came up, mental toughness, Wake Forest isn't exactly the pressure cooker that Georgia is, but there are some similarities between Georgia and USC. And JT Daniels has been through that. He's come in as a freshman in the summer and won a starting quarterback job. He's been on I think with him playing through that 5-7 USC season, that's probably taught him a lot about how to handle adversity. I think even while, yes, his ACL injury is largely a negative, that's just another opportunity and obstacle that he's had to overcome. So I do think that all sort of factors into what Monken says and is like about JT Daniels and how that might mean that he likes Daniels a little bit more than he liked Newman.
Jeff, I'm a Georgia fan, so therefore, if any Georgia quarterback is successful, I'll be happy no matter who it is. But from your perspective as a recruiting reporter, I have to admit that there's a part of me that's a little bit concerned about how this Newman aspect of the story is going to play on the recruiting trail. Even if JT Daniels goes on to have success, will people think that Georgia held Jamie Newman hostage by bringing him in? Who knows what kind of promise you have to make to a guy like that to even bring him onto your roster. And then all of a sudden he decides that he has to opt out and play football nowhere because he's not sure what he's going to have going on at Georgia. I don't want to draw a line between stories that are not related, but it is certainly noticeable to me that the quarterback's coach that he's worked with, Quincy Avery, appeared to take a shot at Kirby Smart on Twitter this week in relationship to a young quarterback that just got an offer. As I said before, I don't want to connect dots that aren't necessarily connectable, but that was definitely noticed by me, probably noticed by other people as well. Do you think a way in which this Newman story is handled has the potential of having some sort of negative impact on Georgia recruiting?
I don't think so, Brent. I think I'll go back to something I said earlier. I think this is a blip and an aberration. Here's what I mean by that. You've got Georgia and Newman, and I keep coming back to this marriage relationship thing. With every other recruit, you can state your intentions. Brock Vandegrift knows what Monken's offense is going to look like. He knows what he's going to be. There's going to be a relationship there with every one of those meetings, calls, or whatever, where everybody knows where each side is coming from. I don't think that happened with the courting process, if there was even any courting process with Jamie Newman. You look at the other 2022 quarterbacks Georgia's working on right now. There's MJ Morris. There's Braden Davis. There's a litany of guys in the 2022 class that Georgia's talking to right now. They're going to know Monken. They're going to know what Monken wants. Monken's going to get on the board. They're already talking about concepts with the Georgia offense and everything else like that. I think Newman is just going to wind up being a guy that, for whatever reason, and I'm going to go back to something you said earlier because I had a point on this. If Jamie Newman was on this feed right now and we had a chance to sit there and say, what should he say? Because whatever his situation is, Brandon, he's going to answer that question with millions of dollars on the line when he gets in front of NFL personnel guys and general managers. I hope he simply just comes to the conclusion that, you know what, I just didn't feel like my best assets for my football career were spent worrying about COVID in a COVID environment. Remember, this young man has been in college since 2016. He already holds a very good degree from Wake Forest. Maybe he felt like he was better served enhancing his draft stock rather than go through the rigors of an SEC schedule. Mind you, play 10 games in the SEC against an all-conference schedule. I think I'd love to hear anybody on this forum right now that says they think Jamie Newman would have put up equal per game numbers against that SEC schedule, or whether those numbers would have taken a dip. I think it comes back to something we've always said about Newman is I think Newman looked at everything. Maybe it's a little bit of COVID. Maybe it's a little bit of wearing the mask. Maybe it's a little bit of stuff at home. Maybe it's a little bit of not wanting to have to go through a quarterback competition. I think he looked at all those factors and thought his safer move, his more equitable move to maintain a early initial multi-million-dollar NFL contract was to sit out. And let's also remember this. Brendan, I must have missed these reevaluations, but when Jamie Newman came to Georgia, I was hearing from these NFL draft experts, number 3, number 4 quarterback prospect in the 2021 draft, had the ability with a great season at Georgia to move into the top 10 or mid-first round. Somewhere over the last couple months, that changed from a 4th to 6th round pick who with a great year at Georgia could move himself into the first round. Something changed there with the tea leaves once he got at Georgia.
Connor.
And I would just, with his draft stock, he is still going to be eligible for the Senior Bowl. He'll have a chance to go out there and improve it. I just, with Newman and his draft stock, it always, and I was probably more vocal than other people downplaying some of the hype that came with Newman, just because this whole idea of, oh, we're going to drop him in this Georgia offense with George Pickens and a Zamir White that we don't know what he's going to look like, and a James Cook that we don't know what he's going to look like, and 3 new starters on the offensive line. And to just pencil him in and assume that he's going to be a Heisman Trophy candidate, that he's going to do all these things with something that we just never even seen, that always felt like a bit much to me. And I think weirdly now you're seeing a lot of people who were perhaps so far out in front of Newman and perhaps even overhyping his abilities. Now they're wildly swinging the other way and saying, oh, he was never going to do this. He was, he's not quite as good as JT Daniels, which he might not be. JT Daniels could be very good and validate a lot of the 5-star hype we see this season. But with Newman now, it weirdly feels like, for whatever reason, because we've never seen him in this Georgia offense, in this Georgia uniform, that it swung from way overhyping him to way, diminishing him and what he might have done. And reality is he probably falls somewhere in the middle there.
So I said this on Dog Nation Daily today. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, Brandon, I'm going to pull my, once in a while, got to interrupt this Maximus card right here. I want to come back with what you said about how he will remember. I think Newman will be remembered not based on what happens with him, his pro combine, or his first few years in the NFL. If JT Daniels comes into Georgia and balls out and has an all-SEC type season, and folks, it would be a one-and-done season if he has an all-SEC type season. Here's what happens. Everybody looks at that and goes, oh, football worked itself out. It wasn't Georgia disenfranchising Jamie Newman. It was Georgia practice field, early fall camp, arriving at the best decision for its football class. The same way Justin Fields is now remembered for what he's done at Ohio State. If Justin Fields struggled in that first year, the football field worked it out. And all of a sudden everybody goes, wow, Kirby, Georgia made the wrong decision there. Even though it's Ryan Day's offense versus James Coley's offense, like kind of apples and oranges right there. Everybody has these perceptions of how mismanaged that situation was because Justin just went bonkers with all that talent last year. If Justin has a very good, maybe an all Big Ten season, I don't think the extremes are being debated there.
Connor, you had something you want to say?
Well, I was just going to sort of piggyback off that. Jeff largely made a similar point, but if Jake Fromm has a better year last year and gets Georgia into the playoff, and granted, I don't think anybody was beating LSU last season, but if Jake Fromm has a better statistical year and it looks something closer to Justin Fields, nobody cares about whether or not Justin Fields is still in the UGA student directory and the possibility that he might transfer back here.
Yeah, his shadow is still so huge over the program because of what Georgia did not do in his absence a year ago.
By the way, I believe Jake Fromm is still in that same UGA student directory as well.
There's a chance Eddie Meek Cleaver Weaver's still in there. I mean, who knows at this point in time? It's Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. That's Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel here as well. My name is Brandon Adams. It's all brought to you by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. They're always the home team. They are there for you for all of your insurance needs. Find them online at gfbinsurance.com. It's gfbinsurance.com. Home insurance, auto insurance, life insurance, they have got you covered. Find them online, gfbinsurance.com. So let's talk more about JT Daniels now. And, I want to kind of get into what the outlook is for him this upcoming year. And obviously, I guess the cloud that still hangs over this is that for now, as Kirby Smart said on Saturday, he would not be cleared to play if there was a tackle football game on this very day, or at least if there was on Saturday, which was the last time we heard from Smart. Mike, how much of a concern for Georgia fans should it be that, at least for now, whether it be semantic or not, Smart won't acknowledge that Daniels could go out and play tackle football and be dragged to the ground?
I mean, it's curious, but obviously if they're giving him first-team reps, they believe that he could be ready by the start of the season. Otherwise, I don't think they'd be working him with the ones. How much of it is precaution versus performance? I'm not sure. I'm not there to do the testing. I know that, the knee brace that he was in when he got here isn't the same one he's in now. The size of it's been reduced. But obviously, to your point, Kirby said Saturday that he wasn't cleared for game action. It's interesting he's cleared for a scrimmage. Although the quarterbacks are non-contact. And once he does start the season, I think his health is an issue. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that losing a guy like Jamie Newman, there's less margin for error. There's one less, experienced guy in the room now. I mean, now the big question is who's number two, right? Is it Dwan Mathis? Is it Carson Beck? And to what extent can they run the offense? It's funny. I sit here talking with you and someone on Facebook tells me that Georgia only ran 6 plays in 2018. So how in the world could Justin Fields not have run an offense where there's only 6 plays? It's amazing to me, the rapid conclusions and the low-hanging fruit that people want to grasp right away. Like I said, everyone seems to have a narrative and they look for anything to back up their assertions without really knowing the facts. And to Connor's point, if JT Daniels proves to be this great 5-star quarterback, I think Jeff might have also said it. I think everyone goes, okay, this worked out pretty good. And fact is, JT Daniels was a pretty good quarterback coming out of high school, had a tough freshman year, got off to a good start as a sophomore. But, you're looking at a guy that's flown the jet. He's been out there in the big games, and now it's just a matter of how quickly he can get healthy and then keeping him healthy.
Jeff, I think Daniel's experience does matter. I thought it was a huge move when Georgia brought him in. But I have to admit, when you go back and look at, and I'm going to only kind of focus on 2018 because, yes, while Daniels had a good game against Fresno State in 2019, that was the most part an abysmal defense. But when you look at just, what he did over the course of 2018 season, he didn't have Graham Harrell as his play caller. That was obviously something that Slovis benefited from this past season. But on the basis of just that year alone, it is a little hard to tell just how good Daniels is. I'm like Mike, the fact that he was a 5-star coming out of high school, the fact that he earned the starting job as a freshman is a pretty big nod in his favor. But those results are the classic example of results being mixed. How good do you think Daniels can be for Georgia this season, assuming for a moment that he is healthy?
All right, Brandon, perfect segue. I did not know if you could have dialed up and put the Titleist Pro V1X, the ones you play with, Brandon.
Whoa, no free advertisements here. Whoa, just use a generic golf ball.
No, Brandon would like Titleist advertising on the show, man. That's a freebie right there. So here's what, and everybody's on I'm looking at trying to keep up with Facebook and YouTube right now, and they're like, Jeff, bruh, Pac-12, what are we talking about here? They play no defense there. Sorry, Connor. But let's take a quick look at, the Jamie Newman kicked the can down the road. Let's put that one on the shelf, and let's talk about JT Daniels. Here's one chief difference. In that 2018 season Brandon wanted to hear about, I believe he faced Notre Dame in the 2018 season. He faced UCLA. He faced Cal. He faced Texas. He faced Washington State, at Stanford, at Texas. He went for 340 against Notre Dame. He went for 337 against UCLA. He went for 322 against Texas. Freshman, mind you, with a lot of Jake Fromm, anchorish, working against him type situations on that 2018 USC season. USC goes 5-7. But if anybody looked at that JT Daniels season, they will see that 4 of those losses were one-score games where JT Daniels was keeping his team in it. And I think you look at that. You remember Notre Dame, UCLA, Stanford, Texas. Those are big boy environments.
Well, he played awful against Stanford. I mean, now I would say his best performance was against Notre Dame, which may have been the best team the USC played all season long.
And that was his last game of the year as well.
Yeah, I would say that's the argument in favor of Daniels when he get against Notre Dame. The Stanford game is not an argument in favor of JT Daniels, I don't believe. And while he had a nice yardage total against Texas, if memory serves, he did not throw a touchdown in that game.
So, I mean, I think that was his second start of his freshman year when he faced Stanford. I think Stanford was a top 10 team at the time. I would imagine that offense was kind of like in caretaker, just give us a chance to mode. Give us a chance to win mode. I think that was only a 2-score loss, 17-3, something like that. So that was a game in his second game of his true freshman season where I believe the training wheels were definitely on JT Daniels at this time. But here's the part that I think is invaluable. You face a Texas, you face a Notre Dame, you face a Stanford, you face a UCLA, you face a lot of those big teams. And I think there was really only 2 games where of those 7 losses where JT Daniels in the limited, I think I'm fair in saying limited capability USC offense, especially by the end of the year, were crushed. And I think that was the Utah loss. And I think that was the Stanford loss, which were more than 2-score games. But I think he learned a lot right there. And all I know, Brandon, is you have that synergy of game reps and you have that synergy of what he was like coming out as a recruit. And JT Daniels, the way he throws the ball, everybody that sees JT Daniels throw the ball will say he throws a very nice ball. You've written all those stories and read all those stories about how he looks like a mathematician and Russell Crowe from A Beautiful Mind when he's sitting there getting on the board and doing the X's and O's. You see all that. And then I know some very smart talent evaluators that I hold in very high esteem. They watched Trevor Lawrence for a whole week in Texas at the All-American Bowl. They watched JT Daniels the whole week that week in the All-American Bowl as well. They were competing on different sides. And a lot of folks thought it was really hard to peg who had the better week of camp among All-Americans that week. They were mentioning Trevor Lawrence and JT Daniels in the same sentence.
Connor,
so
how good? Go ahead.
Wrapping it up, I know a lot of people are wondering about that Pac-12 and the 14 touchdowns and I think the 12 interceptions and everything else like that. I'll give you that. But he also learned quite a lot from that freshman year as well.
Connor, how good do you think JT Daniels, assuming he's healthy for now, we will, because I assume that he will be, how good do you think he can be for Georgia this season?
I wonder if he can be like 2018 Jake Fromm, 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see where his knee is and how that sort of impacts him, as well as there's also the truncated schedule. Georgia, I think, is very much going to rely on its running game this year. I know we've talked a ton about quarterbacks, but based on what we've heard out of Zamir White and James Cook, those guys have looked very good in camp so far. I think it's always going to be a run-dominant team when you have a team sort of built out like this. But, to Jeff's point about 4 one-score games, it's with JT Daniels, and this has sort of been the rub with Georgia under Kirby Smart. Can they win, especially against an Alabama, an LSU, I'll include a Florida in there as well, against those big boys, those best of the best? Can they make enough plays on the offensive side of the ball to have a lead and keep a lead throughout 4 quarters of gameplay? I think that, more than statistical production, is what's going to be most interesting to see with JT Daniels this year. I know that that Notre Dame game, Notre Dame was undefeated, went to the college football playoff. I know everyone will poo-poo that, but that Notre Dame team did play Clemson closer than Alabama did.
They did.
And JT Daniels, I think that last game last year, and then starting off Fresno State game off well, I think is a good sign of showing him improving and getting better with more reps. And now he's got that opportunity to do that within the Georgia offense again now that Jamie Newman is no longer here.
You know, Mike, the one thing you said about Daniels that I probably agree with the most is if you go back and look at some of those games for him in 2018, it does seem he was comfortable making the shorter intermediate throws, what I might kind of casually call an easier throw. Whatever reason, that wasn't Newman's strength at Wake Forest. He was really good on tougher, longer throws. So from that standpoint, based on what we think a Todd Monken offense might look like, kind of slotting himself in there, making some easier throws, it's easy to understand why that might be a fit on the basis of what we did see him do well with when he was at USC in 2018.
And he's got a big arm. He hit some deep passes too, but those intermediate throws, not just softer, but more layering, putting it over outstretched arms. Aaron Murray talked about Jamie struggles with that as being a strong rifle-armed guy. Sometimes those guys have an issue learning the touch passes. He said Justin Fields was a great example of a guy who came in with the same power to knock everybody down with your throws arm, but really learned and adjusted to that Ohio State offense, really showed that he had the talent to layer the ball. And I think Jamie was going to try and do this. I'm going to run some numbers by this. This is going to surprise you when we talk about different quarterbacks and different systems. And I think you guys will probably see where this is going. As I look at the top 10 passers in SEC history, number 1 is Aaron Murray. Number 2 is David Green. Number 3 is Chris Leak. They've got no NFL career to speak of. I think you would say that was largely a product of the system. Now, Peyton Manning's number 4, but there at 5 is Eric Zier. Number 6 is Danny Werfel. Number 7, Jared Lorenzen. We got Eli Manning at 8, another Manning. Casey Clausen at 9, never played in the NFL. Bo Wallace at 10.
Dr.
You
Bo
take a look.
Wallace.
Yeah, you take a look at those guys, and being good in a college offense doesn't necessarily translate to being able to play well in a pro-style offense. For example, the Spurrier system. The genius to Spurrier, which is what everybody does now, is the quarterbacks would look to the sideline, and Steve Spurrier would make the read for them. They would know when they went to the line of scrimmage after looking to Spurrier which half of the field they needed to read. They didn't even look at the other half. So they were very ill prepared for the NFL. You see that a lot now. Guys will go to the line, clap their hands once to see what the defense does, look over at the coach calls the play, and they adjust to the defensive lineman. So what you're seeing now is less pro style because it's harder to get those guys that can manage the game. It takes time to get comfortable in that sort of system. Now, Jake Fromm had the luxury his freshman year of a very simplified offense with Sony Michel and Nick Chubb. He didn't have to do all those things that he did as a sophomore. So a lot of it has to do with your supporting cast. Quarterback is very dependent on who you have around you. And I would say that the numbers JT Daniels puts up will have a lot to do with Georgia's ability to find a number 2 and a number 3 receiver and to find a running back that can fit into that next mold, because I'm not sold that Zamir White or Kenny McIntosh or James Cook is going to just roll off the tongue when we say Gurley, Chubb, Michelle, Swift. I'm not convinced that Georgia has the guy that's going to measure up to those 4 great running backs that preceded this season.
Mike, I think most people would say that Georgia didn't have enough explosive plays offensively last year. I would say if they don't improve in that metric, they're not winning a national championship. Does JT Daniels give Georgia a better chance of having explosive plays than they had a year ago or they would have otherwise had if he wasn't the starting quarterback?
Yeah, BA, because the number one thing Todd Monken said was key to explosive plays, and I never really thought about it, but he's absolutely right, was putting the defense in a run-pass conflict. And we all know what that is. It's staying ahead of the chains, making it 2nd and 5 instead of 2nd and 10, 3rd and 3 instead of 3rd and 8. It's not an obvious pass situation. So if you've got a quarterback that can make the pre-snap read, lay it, and it doesn't sound exciting to lay it off short, but hey, instead of getting sacked for a 6-yard loss, it's a 4-yard gain on a swing pass. Or find that quarterback that can find the mismatch, that can spy that safety that's shading over on George Pickens and realizes that if he does this and Trey McKitty runs the skinny post, that safety's no longer going to be there and that linebacker can't cover him. If you can find that quarterback that can manage the game and be that coach on the field, that gives you the best opportunity for explosive plays, provided the receiver catches the ball, which is something Tyler Simmons didn't do on the first play of the game against LSU, or it would have been a 65-yard touchdown and a 7-0 lead.
Couple quick thoughts on this, and we're going to move on. Jeff, how about you? Does JT Daniels put Georgia in a position to have more explosive plays? They desperately need them.
Yes, but it's not by as much as you might think. I'm wanting to see. I think we've reached the part in this show where I think we need to give some stage time to Dwan Mathis.
We're going to do that in just 1 second. We're going to do that before. That's our next topic.
Just a second, Jeff. Answer the question,
That's
man.
That's our next topic.
Hey, show narrator, showrunner. Here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to answer the question by bringing up Dwan Mathis. I know you got a format brain here, but I'm not trying to skip to the next tee box. All I'm saying is Dwan Mathis brings something as well. I can't answer that question, man, without saying Dwan versus – I can't say Dwan versus JT Daniels when I'm thinking about does it make it more explosive? Well, Dwan's going to bring a lot of skills to Georgia's offense as well. It's going to change the way they're defended. I mean, you're really all that dual threat, the stuff I love with DJ Shockley. I used to make my friends silly back in the day because I was like, Shockley needs a shot. Look how we can change things up right here. I've long held the belief that the mobile quarterback changes the way you're schemed all across the board. When Dwan Mathis, if he gets 66% of what Todd Monken's trying to teach him early on in the season, well, then he opens up the Georgia offense. He makes James Cook more deadly. He makes Zamir White more deadly. He makes the tight end more deadly. He makes those intermediate throws, those shots right over the middle of the field a lot more deadly. You got to see here now, and I want to sound like a football person's answering your question because I don't think it's gray. I don't think it's black and white here, Brandon. I don't think it's gray. I think you got to sit there and you got to go, how much better is Dwan Mathis going to get without Jamie Newman's reps now over the next 2 weeks? You take that out, Carson Beck gets more reps, Dwan Mathis gets more reps, and eventually JT Daniels, when he gets cleared, will have more reps as well. I think how well Dwan Mathis progresses, the best athlete at quarterback, probably maybe the biggest arm, maybe not the most accurate arm. He gets a chance to show what he can do too when he now really has a chance to grab the reins. I'm going to double down on that question. I'm going to say JT Daniels to answer your question, but it's not by as much as most of it might think.
So are you saying that you think Dwan Mathis is going to play a significant number of snaps for Georgia this season in non-backup quarterback traditional roles?
I think we've got to see how Dwan Mathis progresses over the next 2 weeks and in early games if he gets some time. If he makes this a true competition with Dwan Mathis where the coaches go, we know what JT Daniels can do. JT Daniels can give you, like Connor said, a lot of that 2018 Fromm stuff, maybe with a little bit more athleticism, maybe with a little bit sharper arm, a little bit quick decision, all that razor sharp you liked about Fromm, but maybe a little bit more RPMs on the ball. You're going to look at that and you go, but what does Dwan Mathis give this offense as well? And I think that's the reason Georgia brought Jamie Newman into town in the first place. It's because they wanted that dynamic quarterback run threat with legs that everybody has now. We saw how the Ohio State Clemson game worked out. We saw how those big boy college football games went. You need to have a run threat under center.
Connor, go ahead.
So I have two questions here. The first one is for Mike only because he has made this point before, and I want to give him the chance to follow through it and see if this has changed his thinking. Do you still think that Georgia gets through the season starting only one quarterback?
Wow. You kind of figured out my ace in the hole on the JT Daniels there, Connor. You kind of backed me into a corner here. I kind of thought Daniels was going to overtake Newman if Newman didn't get injured. The odds would say so when you consider that only 4 out of 14 teams last year made it through an 8-game SEC season. JT's going to get rid of the ball quickly. I think they're going to protect him a lot like they protected Jake last season. I think you're going to see more packages for different quarterbacks. You're going to see an effort to get Dwan Mathis and Carson Beck involved. I mean, I don't think we can overlook Carson Beck. I mean, he's also very athletic and has a big arm. JT Daniels is a guy that's going to know how to protect his knee. I mean, he's going to be careful. Part of what I didn't like about Newman was I thought he took a lot of shots when I watched the film of the games that Wake Forest played, and he ran the ball a lot. And I thought he took a lot of punishment when he ran the ball. JT's already got one knee. I think he's a guy that gets rid of the ball quick. I think the scheme's going to be different. Don't think he's going to run the ball as much as a guy like Jamie Newman at 6'4", 230 would have been apt to do. So I'm in the 50-50 camp, Connor. That's where I'm at on that one now.
So then my follow-up, and this is for the room, we've talked a lot about who the potential starter for Georgia is. Who do we think is the number 2 guy? Because I think that, given the case Mike just laid out there, might be just as important this season now that Georgia no longer has Jamie Newman.
Yeah, let's roll when we'll make this part of our Dwan Mathis, Carson Beck conversation here, because the one thing I'll say about that, Jeff, is the same reason why I always favored Newman and Daniels over the other quarterbacks in this roster was because of their experience. If you make the comparison between Mathis and Beck, I'm not saying it's impossible that Carson Beck could beat out Dwan Mathis, but I would say it's unlikely because Mathis has been on campus for a year. That's not playing games, but it is going through practice. I think standing behind the plate and watching some practice does have value. I don't mean to bring up a corny Butch Jones line about, mental reps and things like that, but when you're involved in that play and you're seeing it from the perspective of a quarterback, I do think you're learning something. We also know that Dwan Mathis was practicing by the end of last year. I think that matters. There's a huge leap to go from 0 to 1 in terms of years of experience, even though that experience didn't come in a game. So the same way that I would have made Newman and Daniel substantial favorites over the other quarterbacks to win the starting job, I'll make Mathis a fairly sizable favorite over Beck to be the primary backup here.
Jeff, I think you and I probably feel similar now that, and I wrote about this today in Cover 4, why I think the big winner, the guy most affected by all this, is in fact Dwan Mathis, because I think as Jeff sort of laid out a little bit earlier, there is now a chance for a bigger role, maybe not even as a starter, but as a sort of package player. Maybe even like how we saw Justin Fields as frustratingly as he was used in 2018, used in sort of a similar role there with Mathis, and perhaps why he now makes sense to be the prime backup candidate for Georgia this season.
I've got a way of looking at this that may be different than most. I think I want to see this theory disproven by the Georgia staff this year. A lot of times Georgia has went with the quarterback most likely to get them to the SEC championship game. And I don't know if you need to look at that this way anymore. I think when we're sitting here, throwing flares up, trying to dig into this right now, I think Georgia's got to make the decision in the next 3 weeks to sit there and go, which quarterback is most likely for us to win a championship with? And especially those games, I think they're still going to be played in December. Who's going to get better with 10 games of reps against an SEC schedule? I'm kind of on the Mike train here. The SEC is a very physical league. Now you don't get those cupcakes in the middle to rest your body or only play a quarter and a half. And I think attrition at the quarterback in a lot of positions is going to come into play. I think JT Daniels doesn't expose his body to a lot of shots. He plays the game a lot differently than maybe Jamie Newman would have. I think the Vegas odds on JT Daniels starting 10 games are going to be higher than Jamie Newman's were. But you got to sit there and look at this one factor. This one factor is, can Dwan Mathis, if we get the best out of him, which is what Todd Monken is being paid to do now with all these weapons around him as well, is he the guy that can help us win game 14 and game 15, or game 12 and 13 now, I think, if I get my math right. Is he the guy that does that? I don't know that answer to that question. No, I can sound smart and concoct a theory and say I know the answer to that question. I think JT Daniels is more likely to get Georgia to game 11 and then a chance to win. But I don't know yet with JT Daniels if he could win, if he could outgun Trevor Lawrence. Maybe he wouldn't have to because the Georgia defense would be that salty. But I do think Dwan Mathis, with the experience, the 10-9, the big arm, the ability to open up the offense in a different way, I think he does give Georgia something completely different than what JT Daniels does. And then the split the bit guy, I got to mention Carson Beck, because Carson Beck is not quite Jamie Newman. He's not quite JT Daniels. He's not quite Dwan Mathis, but he's more like those other three guys combined. Maybe he's a 7 in an area where Dwan's a 9. Maybe he's an 8 in a lot of areas. Carson Beck is a guy that gives you a blend of all those styles. If you want a guy that can give you wiggle to move the chains, Carson Beck can do that. If you want a guy that can sound like an offensive coordinator by the time he's a sophomore and understand all those concepts that's being thrown at him in a meeting room, Carson Beck can do that. He also has a howitzer for an arm. He will squeeze the ball in tight windows, and he will throw the ball all over the field. Maybe a little bit too much. Maybe he's a little too much of a gunslinger. But a guy like Jim Donnan has always said he wants a quarterback that will try to make the play at times and turn the ball over when he's trying to make a play for his team. And I think that thing with Beck right there, he also gets more reps as well, and he has a chance to improve getting 33% more reps in that room.
We're going to get your comments here coming up in just a moment. Mike, let me bring you on this because I know you've kind of touted the idea that maybe there would be a special package for Mathis. Here's what I'll say. I loved Juan. I can't wait to watch him play this year. I am very excited about that. But if they're bringing in Mathis to run what I would call a gimmick offense, as a fan, that would make me nervous that maybe JT Daniels isn't quite getting it done the way that he needs to if you're having to bring in, gadget plays from the sidelines. I want to see Mathis play, but I want to see him play as a quarterback. Georgia doesn't need its version of Taysom Hill, what the New Orleans Saints have had. Georgia needs a quarterback because that's been an area in which I would say the program was deficient a year ago, and I would say handled oddly back in 2018. So I love the idea of Mathis playing, but I want to see him playing as a traditional quarterback who gets a chance to use his athleticism in that role. I don't want to see, if Daniels is the starter, I don't want to see him sidelined so that they can come in and run, circus offense for a couple of plays, beyond that. If you want Mathis to play, let him play as a regular quarterback. Don't hamstring him with kind of gadget play offense. I don't think that's good for Mathis or Georgia. That's obviously just my opinion.
I think gadget is different than being a team player. I remember Tim Tebow talking about this in 2018 and, talking about the role that he had behind Chris Leak. And, he had a reduced package because he was a true freshman quarterback and Chris Leak was a proven guy that was able to run the entire offense. And Tim said he wanted to do whatever he could to help the football team. And if that was a 3rd and 1 or if that was a goal line package, it was one more thing that a defense had to prepare for. Had to come up with a different scheme for. And I remember Tim Tebow saying that he felt like, that would have really helped Justin Fields out rather than, the whole thing about how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, rather than handing the guy a 500-page playbook and saying, learn all this, give him 10 pages and say, perfect this. And that way, when he's in the game, he's efficient. Now, to your point, I don't know if you're saying when Juan's in there that you don't want him to run the ball.
Not what I'm saying.
Okay, well, the air raid offense is not an RPO option offense. It's different, and it's about distributing the ball. And you heard Todd Monken talk about balance and getting the ball out to a lot of different people. And I go back to my point guard versus shooting guard mentality. Dwan Mathis at this stage of his career is a shooting guard. He's a guy that's going to beat you with a big arm. He can put it between people downfield, or he can take off and run with that incredible speed. We saw him run in the open field in the G-Day game of 2019. And Dwan is still learning quarterback skills because while he was on campus, he started playing scout team a bit more in October, November, had some bowl practice, but he also missed out on spring football. So he's not as far advanced as a typical redshirt freshman would be because he wasn't healthy for the entirety of the season. He didn't really get to run the Georgia offense until the bowl game, and he missed out on spring. So I'm excited about Dwan and his opportunities. I've talked with his dad a couple of times. I think that, Dwan has an opportunity to learn a pro-style system where, with his power, with his speed, with his arm strength, if he can get the nuances of an air raid, Dwan Mathis is probably a future first-round NFL draft pick.
All right, that's Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel here, Connor Riley as well. It's our Cover 4 Live presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. We've done the Cover 4 part. Let's move into the Cover More, give you a chance to weigh in with your questions and comments, a chance to weigh in on anything related to the Georgia quarterback situation or anything else on your mind as it relates to UGA before we wrap up this on a Thursday night. Of course, we appreciate all of you being here today. By the way, Huck Finn brings up Urban Meyer and the YouTube comment section. Mike, you've covered the SEC for a gazillion years. I don't want to spend very long on this because it doesn't really matter. But if 2006 was 2020, there's no way that Chris Leak remains the Florida starter. Tim Tebow would have become the Florida starter during the year because that's how business is handled now. That's not what things were like back in 2006. But Tebow would have overtaken Leak in 2006 because that's what you do now.
Wow. Chris Leak was winning a lot of games. I think he's the number 3 all-time passer. I'm not sure that Urban Meyer would have made that move. I think as it was, he got the most out of both of those quarterbacks, and I covered the national championship game against the Ohio State. And, Florida had a really good thing going. I mean, it was a heck of a 1-2 punch. Chris Leak was actually a Tennessee recruit, pretty good quarterback, just because he didn't make it in the NFL. I think he had a very good CFL career, though. Once again, comes down to the system and who he was playing with. I don't know if Chris Leak was that good or if it was that Percy Harvin was that good, right?
Cool Breeze JP on YouTube, Jeff, agrees with you when you say you got to play the guy that gives you the best chance of winning a national championship. Go a little bit more detail about, how you would know who that was, and I guess how you would potentially decide between a Mathis and a Daniels that way.
I think it's two. There's two ways to figure this out. One, you overload him and see how much that Dwan Mathis can give you, how much of the offense he can bring to bear. And also, hey, you know what? Georgia's got as good a defense as anybody will have in the country. If Dwan Mathis can confound, befuddle, perplex Dan Lanning and those dudes on the other side of the ball, if he can do that and move the chains consistently against Georgia's number one defense, that's going to work against Arkansas, Tennessee, Auburn, Alabama, everybody they face, Florida as well. I think that's how you figure it out. And I want to ask everybody, YouTube, Facebook, Brandon, you're catching a little slack from people on Facebook because you're giving more love to YouTube. I just want to keep you updated on that. This is a question for everybody. Dog food or dog poop? I'm going to go with that again. Here's what I got. Does anyone out there think, raise your hand, up, down, whatever, that this is a chance for Georgia with contrasting styles of quarterback to choose between the pocket passer with all the precision and efficiency you'd want and the dual threat, except there's no head start in experience. There's no head start in game reps. There's no head start in equity within the program from either guy. Who thinks that this ultimate decision could be about that?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a fair fight between Mathis and Daniels because Daniels has played a lot more. That doesn't mean that Mathis couldn't overtake him. But if you wanted to have the referendum on does Georgia want a dual threat quarterback, that was the guy we started the show with, the guy who had played the college level in Jamie Newman. In Mathis's case, anything is possible. And for a guy like Dwan, who's already overcome so much, him overcoming this obstacle wouldn't be the most shocking thing that's ever happened. But he's a sizable underdog to beat out JT Daniels as the starting quarterback because Daniels was the starting quarterback at USC 2 years ago. So I don't think Mathis versus Daniels can be a referendum on Georgia's wish for a dual threat quarterback because it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, I don't think that this is that Daniels and Mathis right now are purely even quarterbacks. I think you have to take into account what Daniels did at USC a year ago. And again, I'm not a doctor here, but Dwan Mathis, I'll be interested to see what he looks like when he gets hit, given his brain surgery and his brain injury. Obviously, it's very different from a knee injury, and they wouldn't clear him if that were not the case. But it's not like he was a bill of health last year either. There are some questions about how he looks and gets when he does get those first live real game reps whenever that happens.
Connor, let me bring you on something Bryce Dixon also mentioned on Facebook because I know you wrote about this morning. I talked about this. This has been a hot topic for me all the way around. I can't find his comment now, but it was essentially something to the effect of if Georgia doesn't, change up the offense, they're not going, anywhere anyway. And you wrote about this in relationship to Monken. I talked about this and have talked about this for a while. Whether you're talking about Jamie Newman as the starter, now he's gone, JT Daniels stepping up, Dwan Mathis shocking the world and becoming the starter here. The most important figure involved in the Georgia offense, I believe, is still Todd Monken. And it sounds like Bryce Dixon, on the basis of his comment, kind of agrees with that as well. You wrote about that today, so share your opinion.
Yeah, one of the, I think, long-running sort of fun debates we've had this past offseason is relitigating LSU's success a year ago and who was more responsible for it. You have held that Joe Brady was the guy who really unlocked a lot of pieces and players for that team. And two examples, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Justin Jefferson were not highly well thought of recruits. They were not big-time college football names even this time a year ago. And Brady helped turn them into first-round draft picks. I had been of the belief that it was Joe Burrow, the guy out there who was dodging Monty Rice and Jordan Davis and chucking the ball 50 yards in the air, making beautiful throws left and right on a very good defense that was very much responsible for LSU's turnaround. The reality is that it's probably somewhere in the middle, and it's probably maybe even close to 50-50. But I think now with Newman opting out so close to the start of the season, when I think we all probably agree here, for game one, he was probably going to be the starter. I think this now puts a whole lot on maybe Monken having to get the absolute most out of this offense, as opposed to maybe a guy like Newman, or if JT Daniels in these circumstances were the guy that came in January and had the full offseason. It's going to be Monken who's going to be tasked with getting the most and making the most out of it, more so than necessarily the quarterback at this point in time.
Mike, Armand Rashad on the Facebook comment section sounds like he just wishes that Georgia did have that dual threat quarterback, whether it's a guy like Mathis or maybe what Newman would have been. Hard not to notice that quarterbacks who use their legs well have been a big part of the college football playoff story in recent years. mean, what would you say to Georgia fans like Armand here in our Facebook comment section, who just doesn't think Georgia's been mobile enough at that position recently, while the rest of college football seems to be going through transformation?
Yeah, well, I think it's, the head coach hired the guy that he wants to run the offense, and he likes what Todd Monken did with the passing game in the NFL and at other stops. And, I don't think Jamie Newman would have been the mobile guy that you saw at Wake Forest. I think he still would have run it. He still could have extended some plays, but part of the reason he left Wake Forest was to play in more of a pro-style offense. These guys don't want to get hit. They don't want to run it 180 times in a season. They want to play in the NFL, and that's not the ticket to the NFL. I mean, having mobility is great in the NFL, but there's just not a lot of guys in the league that's bread and butter is running the football at quarterback. So that was Jamie's desire. I get it. I understand. People look and you look and see what Oklahoma did with Baker Mayfield, or you see what the Ohio State did with Justin Fields. But this is the SEC, and ask Tua Tagovailoa how running the football worked out for him in the SEC. He didn't make it through a season either, and he was one of the most elusive quarterbacks in recent memory. Will young Bo Nix survive another year at Auburn if he tucks the ball too much? You're not going to make a living with a 10-game SEC schedule with a mobile quarterback.
I think Brandon froze.
Can't decide if that's on my end or Mike's. It sounds like we may be getting a little bit of a signal issue here late. So I'll wrap for today. Great stuff from Mike Griffith. You can read more from him at dognation.com. Jeff Sintel, of course, as always. Jeff will be with us tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. Is this on my end? Am I the one that's frozen here? If that be the case, yeah, it looks like I may be out of commission here. Y'all get ready to wrap up and say goodbye for us here.
Mike, you asked.
Like I may have.
Have a great night, everybody.
Y'all have me back. Am I back now? Yeah,
no,
we gotta
Brandon.
go.
You're like
thanks,
the 2019 Georgia offense.
We'll see. We'll see tomorrow.
Weekend. We'll have more coverage. Check out Mike on Friday Night Mike tomorrow night. We're talking to Kirby Smart on Saturday. We'll have coverage there throughout the weekend. Dog Nation Daily at 10 a.m. with Jeff Sintel tomorrow. Have a great Thursday night for Jeff Sintel, Brandon Adams, and Mike Griffith. I'm Connor Riley. See ya.